My name is Rhonda Williams. Um, I am a retired administrator in the public school system, and I have a passion for marital relationships. I've had the privilege of being married twice, and I learned some amazing lessons that I would love to share with others. I have written a book about marriage until death do us part, my journey to joy in marriage. And so you can find me as well as more information about the book at rhondawilliams.org.
Perfect. So you mentioned you've been married twice, which I think is an accomplishment because many people don't even get married once, myself included in that. But I've always had long-term serious relationships. And one thing I did find when I look at myself when I was in that relationship versus when I was single, I learned a lot about the art of compromising, understanding, and communication.
Oh.
So for you, you've been married twice, and that is a step above a lot of other people's relationships. So from your personal experiences, what are some of the things that you learned that was maybe eye-opening to you, but something you're like, I need to hold on to that skill set?
So the first time that I was married, I think I was like a lot of people. I was influenced by the romantic stories I read, the romantic movies I read. I didn't really have a realistic picture of what marriage relationship was. And so I had this idealistic view. And that's how I went into the marriage. So I learned through trial and fire that there are things that help to sustain healthy, happy relationships. And they oftentimes are not the things that we see and experience in the media, the mainstream media, or even within uh, conversations with friends. It's not the romantic gestures, it's the level of commitment. It is open and honest communication. Because I know I used to think my husband was a mind reader. Like, you should know what's going on. I shouldn't have to tell you everything, was kind of how I started out. And I learned very quickly, well, he's not a mind reader. He has to rely on me to share with him what my issues of concern are. And so I don't think I'm an anomaly. I think there are a lot of people who kind of go in with this romanticized idea of what marriage is like or what a long-term relationship should be.
So there was no what do they call them? I'm trying to quote some Disney movies here. There's no white horse, carriage, rose petals from the heavens, angels singing, Cupid shooting arrows. Oh my goodness, I'm aging myself here, Rhonda. But
Well, it might seem that way in the beginning, right? Because that's how we're swooped in. But then reality hits and, you know, you're wondering, hey, what happened? I thought this was the fairy tale. Why did you leave the toilet seat open? Why have you expected me to cook dinner tonight? Real life.
why is that fork still on the counter, not in the sink? Yes, I've been there. I remember a time I look at like reality as being filled with more love, and
Mm.
then the fantasy being filled with more illusion. And I'll expand on that. Like when I look at the Disney story, what's portrayed to us, it feels good, but it
Mm.
leaves you wanting. Right? Like you
Mm.
ever had food where as soon as you finish, you're like, wow, that felt good. And 10 minutes later, you're hungry again. That's what
Yes.
it that's what it feels like, right? Versus the reality, it could be that you woke up one morning and you turned to your left and the person said, you know what, Rhonda, I love you just for being you. Because
Mhm.
sometimes when we hear someone tell us we love you, our immediate reaction is, okay, why are they saying this?
Mhm.
Why are they
Mhm.
telling me that? But they're like, you know what? I love you for being you. And then you look at it, you're like, wow, I literally just opened up my one eye and I got
Mhm.
something as strong as that. Like, did you notice a significant difference like that when you were reflecting on what you expected versus what you grew to appreciate in your relationships?
So I think when I came to kind of this understanding of what real love is and how it's manifested, um, it was it was around understanding what God said marriage is, and it is when two become one. It is serving the other person, and um, and that's a very special bond that allows you to weather the storms, so to speak. You know, when the going gets rough and tough and it's difficult and it's hard, you can circle back to that foundation that we are one. We are not enemies. We are one. And so for me, that kind of understanding the true definition of what love is shaped my entire perspective. I saw things a lot differently in terms of how I interacted, with my husband. And it made all the difference because we weren't competing, we were working together to build a relationship that would be sustainable. And so then it impacted how we interacted with each other. So now when he said that he truly loved me for who I was, that I didn't have to change or be different or conform, but it was the person that's inside of me. Um, it made all the difference, because oftentimes we come together, oh, she's cute, he's cute, oh, we have fun together, we enjoy each other's company, and those are fine, but those are not the things that last, that keep you sealed together, because sometimes you might be in a bad mood. Maybe you had a bad day. Maybe you're not looking so cute. You're still gonna love me. So the love, the definition of love, is very important.
Do you think that is something that is missing in many of the relationships that people try to create these days?
Oh, absolutely. I said, like I said before, I think that we are enamored with these messages about what love is and what relationships are. And it's just so far from the truth in many instances, which is why we have such high divorce rates, which is why the topic of relationships are so popular. Um, I think it was in the 90s, there was a gentleman who wrote a book, Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus. And it talked about, how distant the communication is, and so the differences that we have as individuals compounds all of that false narrative out there. And so, yes, I do think a lot of people um, struggle. It may not be in the beginning, it may be in the middle, it may be towards the end, but I do think a lot of people struggle.
You mentioned something that was interesting, and I think this happens quite a bit, especially if you view it online. But even if you want to take it to like an anecdotal, if you want to take it from maybe some of the research out there, it does seem that competition has entered relationships. So, for example, you'll have some people say that, well, the person has to be as ambitious or more than me, has to earn as much or more than me, has to be as educated or more than me. It's things that don't necessarily define the person, and it's things that definitely don't make a relationship last as long as people think it can last, because you hear more about that online specifically, but you hear less about, does he want to have children? What kind of religion is she a part of? Is religion going to be the center of our relationship? What kind of relationship are we looking to have? Are we planning to get married? Are we going to live together? Like, these things take a back burner to the more so, okay, I want
Mm,
him to be 6 feet, 6 inches, six figures. I
mhm,
want her to be a virgin or only have slept with one person under 25, hopefully over the age of 19 and legal. And she has to be 120 pounds and 5'3". Like
mhm,
it's very superficial. So I know you mentioned the biblical aspect, and I really want to expand on that because I think for me, when I was in the church and when I was in my religion and I began to understand the expectations, which was in a lot of ways a protection.
mhm,
Do you
mhm,
still view it that way, that it is still a protection and some people unfortunately are not protected by the virtues of what a
mhm.
marriage should be or what it should look like?
Absolutely. I think some of those superficial characteristics that we assign to, our future mate have always existed, but it's been amplified by social media, right? So, people post these lovely pictures of two happy people and they're beautiful and they're living this glamorous life and people want that. They think there's joy in that. But it's very deceptive and so, when you really think about the concept of marriage or even long-term relationships, you're thinking of a man and a woman, they're different, not the same. They grow up differently. They're exposed to different things. They have different life experiences, and then they come together and want to build a relationship, even consider bringing in children, raising children. When you think about it conceptually, it just doesn't make sense. You think, how could that possibly work? But God has given us biblical principles to help that be sustainable. And the first and foremost is the definition of marriage and what that is, that it is a lifetime commitment between two people who are God fearing. And when they come together, they become one. So that's what to be equally yoked means. Sometimes there are folks who extend that definition of equally yoked to say it has to be a specific kind of religious practice or denomination. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible just talks about you have to be, um, you have to believe that God is the creator. He's the one who created marriage, and that you are to become one. And in order for that to happen, there's a way you have to relate to each other. Um, and God has given very clear expectations about what the responsibilities of a man are and what the responsibilities of a woman are. Um, he has said that, the husband is to be the protector. He is to be the protector of the relationship, of the family. Um, the woman is to be the nurturer. The woman has insights that help the man to be his best version of himself that are unique to her. Um, in the Bible, it talks about how woman was created from the rib of man to be his helpmeet. And so she is endowed with characteristics and abilities that help him to be his best person. And who benefits from that when he's the best? She does. She benefits from it. Um, he is to be the protector. It says in the Bible, he is to leave and cleave. And sometimes, folks have difficulty with that. Um, my daughter was watching this episode of one of those reality TV shows, Love is Blind. So the people don't see each other and they talk and then they make a commitment. And in this particular episode, the mother of the young woman was talking about how she's planning to interact with her daughter after they were married. And she's like, well, I'm her best friend. She's going to tell me everything, which is a clear violation of leave and cleave. So when we allow others into the relationship and we violate that biblical principle, there will be problems, there will be issues. And so he gives us the recipe to have a successful relationship. Um, when selecting that mate, if you're going to do this lifelong journey, if you're going to be serving others, if you're going to be fulfilling your God-given responsibilities to that person, it certainly makes it a lot easier if you have shared values, if you have shared goals, if you have shared principles, um, because that's sustainable. That that takes you throughout your life. Um, if you believe that family is important, and I say, well, when my parents get older, I would like for them to move in, and you believe in this concept of family, and we share that same value, then it's not an issue. If you don't, then that's going to create some conflict in the relationship. So I think those superficial things are not sustaining, and we have to learn how to move beyond that. That
And
was kind
that's
of
where,
a
no, that was fantastic. And I think that's why the religion was there, and it was very detailed, and it was very to the point when it came to what the expectations are. Because some people, many people, actually, when they look for a job, they
Mhm,
will do a little bit of research. Okay, how established is the company? What's going to pay? What their expectations? When they want to go to a school, same thing. When they want to
mhm.
buy a house in the neighborhood, same thing. When they want to buy a certain type of car, same thing. When it comes to a relationship, hopes and dreams, baby.
Out the window.
Out the window. Like, you would think that something that is so impactful
Important. Mhm,
in your life, you would do more research than your job,
mhm,
because love is forever when it's done right.
mhm,
Your job, even when it's done right, isn't forever, because either you're going to have to retire from it or they're going to replace you from it. But when
mhm.
you have love and that love is strong and that love is done right, there's no retiring from it, because even if one other person leaves, they go from the physical to the spiritual, and from the spiritual, they go into your hearts. They don't ever leave you.
Yeah.
So I always found it interesting why we don't put that much effort into it. Like, why do you think that some people are kind of just free wheeling it when it comes to their relationships, whereas when you look at themselves, when you look at their life in other areas, they're so driven to know as much as possible, but when it comes to dating, they're like, hey, you know what, whatever happens happens, I'll manifest it.
It's those butterflies in the belly. The butterflies in the belly. Oh, he's the one. She's the one. Um, because there's a level of emotionality that's involved in relationships that isn't necessarily involved in some of those other major decisions that we make. And if we're not careful, we can be deceived by that. As I mentioned, God is the creator of this institution called marriage. And so Satan is out to destroy everything that God has created. And so he's subtle, he is a deceiver, and he's real. And he uses all of his wiles and skills to try to deceive us, to lead us kind of astray, to make those decisions based on emotionality or based on the superficial. Um, I remember having a conversation with a young lady who wanted to be in a relationship, a lovely person. And I remember asking, well, what is it that you are looking for? And she described all of the physical attributes. And I said, well, what about how he treats you? Like, is kindness not a can? Well, oh yeah. Well, don't you think that should be the first thing that you lead with? But I think that it's those we want butterflies in the belly. And we think these superficial things are going to give us the butterflies, and it's really just a deception. Um, it's really just a deception. I mean, clearly, attraction plays a role in two people coming together, but we have to move beyond seeing that physical attraction. Like I want to be attracted to the character. Oh, I saw you help that lady walk across the street. Hmm, I'm making mental note of that. I saw you uh offer to help somebody who was in a financial bind. I'm making a mental note of that. That's how we need to begin to reorient how we see potential mates.
A part of me thinks that people who focus so much on the physical attributes don't
Mhm.
ever expect to grow old with their partner because the looks are going to go, right? The
They're
looks
gonna
will
go.
go,
Yeah.
so it's interesting. Like there's a part of the world that they do arranged marriages in a way that yes, you don't meet the person, but yes, that you get introduced. A family brings, let's say, the woman, and the other family brings the man. They have a conversation. They go on a few dates, and then they seal the deal. And some people may say that, well, they're forced into it, and the culture they can't leave. I was like, okay, that's one aspect, right? But over here in the West, there are many people who are forced into marriages that don't last. So if you want to make that argument, you can, but let's put that to the side and let's say that the people actually agree to these marriages. Their divorce rate is less. They've
Yes.
learned to love the person that they're with because they find it sexy when they do certain things around the house. They find it sexy when they do certain things for them versus
Mhm.
the other things, as you mentioned, right? It's like you show up and you look like Denzel Washington or Brad Pitt, but you're a jerk, you're abusive, you're narcissistic. And let's be honest, right? A lot of CEOs are narcissistic,
Mhm.
right? So if you're
Mhm.
going to put that much value on the physical appearance, then are you saying that it's okay to be mistreated by good looking man or a woman, but it's not okay to be treated well by a not good looking man or woman?
I think that is absolutely a part of the psyche of far too many folks. You have people enduring all kinds of nonsense in relationships because they don't want to um, show the ugly side, reveal. It has to be this kind of pretty picture. And there's something to be learned from the arranged marriage concept, because when you look at the characteristics and the things that they use to make those decisions, it's based on how they know you. The people closest to you know you the best, and can see the things that would complement you, that would help you to to be your best self. And so it's not just random. So I think there is something to be learned from that. And you're absolutely right. When we look at the divorce rates, there are patterns around when people separate. You know, Interestingly enough, the rate is high in the early 20s. It's high during years 5 to 7, and then it's high again around the empty nest age, around 20 to 25. And I think it's interesting that those are the times. And when you talk to people who have gone through divorce in those areas, a lot of times they'll say, well, we stayed together for the kids, or, we stayed together for the finances, or some of the younger folks who, well, it wasn't like we thought it was going to be. He was trying to tell me what to do and wanted to have control of my money. And so this deception is out there, and people are falling prey. But I do think that um social media, I think there are advantages and and disadvantages to it. But I do think that there are people who are craving more, who want a better understanding, who want to know how um, to sustain a happy and healthy relationship. They just don't know what to do to get there because they may not have seen it in their own homes. They may not see it with their friends. Um, and so I do think there is a desire because it can be wonderful. I mean, I am a widowed twice, but and the first marriage I had was the learning time. This is when I learned. And then the second one was when I was able to apply those things that I learned. And my husband passed away. So, but it's possible we can do it.
I think sometimes some people, and when you look at like when we're getting married later in life, and that
Mm-hmm.
could be a number of things because we need to be more established and our education is going longer as well. I think many of us have been independent for so long that we
Mm-hmm.
don't know how it's like to be open to the understanding of someone assisting us in our day-to-day life. And I'll give you an example. There's someone who she's been in a few bad relationships, and she's always had to be the one that did everything because unfortunately the type of men that she would date weren't necessarily providers, they were more users. And I think a lot of women probably have experienced that where they feel like they're raising another child, the person that
Mm-hmm.
they're dating. And for the ladies out there, those aren't real men. Okay, a real man is not going to use you for your resources and extract without providing back. He's supposed to provide, and you're supposed to benefit from that provision. But I digress. But in this situation, she came across someone who was assisting her, and you can see the struggle in her mind because she's like, okay, I've always wanted this.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get it when I wanted it. Now there's like a struggle. Do
Mm-hmm.
I open myself up to this
Mm-hmm.
new me? Because it is a new version of that person. Or do I
Mm-hmm.
go back to what has become my default? Whereas, okay, I know my history has led me to believe that every man I have to care for and they go to extract. And I wonder how many men and women who experience this then begin to maybe pull back because they're grieving the quote unquote death of the old them,
Mm-hmm.
very traumatized, very in their pain and in their suffering, and now they have to prepare themselves to celebrate this new person, saying that okay, I have someone that's going to treat me the way I've always been treated. What are your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts?
So I think it can be more challenging for folks when they have lived their adult life independently, have provided for themselves, and then come into relationship to kind of create this bond of oneness. Um, because you're used to doing things on your own, and then sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes kind of in the back of the mind folks are thinking, well, I need to maintain some level of independence in case this doesn't work out, which that's a whole nother topic, like that's destructive to the relationship, having an exit door already in mind. But it can be very, very challenging. Um, and then for someone who has been accustomed to being in these relationships where it's out of order, um, and then now you're in a relationship where things are as they are supposed to be, it can be challenged because your natural inclination is going to be to not accept it or to be suspect of it or to challenge it in subtle ways. And those things may be happening on a level that you're not even aware of because it's just so ingrained in how you're operating. But, I would say stay the course and it can be such a beautiful thing. But I do think, the mind is very powerful and we can convince ourselves of things that are not true. Um, and in time, I think if you're open and in time, the young lady would be able to accept it. But it would take time because, it's kind of going against the grain for her, but it's the direction she should be going. Absolutely.
I agree that that's a proper order of things.
Mhm.
And I can see maybe why, like the other side, because from a man's perspective, you have a lot of men online who will complain and say that, well, I'm just going to get someone younger who doesn't have that type of quote unquote baggage. And I can see that perspective. But what
Mhm.
happens in that case then, if there isn't anyone to show these men and women differently, no one will,
Exactly.
right? And then as they get older and older, that is going to linger, right? Like that traumatic response, that trigger. So they're going to go into relationships because the relationship is going to be few and far between because all they know is the chaos, the
Mhm.
toxicity, right? And now they're going to negatively infect the people that they come in contact with. And God forbid that you have children being born out of those situations. The children are going to think this is normal. So, yeah, now you have a whole generation of people who's going to go out there. And for the men and women who are trying to avoid older people, well, this generation that's coming up, they're waiting for you with the same trauma that you're avoiding from their parents.
And the cycle continues. Yeah, we have to break those cycles. We have to break those cycles. Um, when I married the second time, I had a daughter and she was a toddler at the time. And but when we were dating, I was very guarded. Um, I didn't want to necessarily get married again, but I connected with this amazing man. And so as the relationship got more serious, so we kept it private. We didn't tell anybody about the relationship, and I didn't expose my daughter to the relationship. But then he said to me, as we were getting more serious, he said to me, he wanted me to consider exposing her to the relationship. He said, because she needs to see what a healthy and happy relationship looks like. She needs to hear how I talk to you. She needs to hear how we negotiate differences. She needs to see us working together on things so that those things begin to define her concept of what a healthy and happy relationship is. He said, because if she doesn't see it, she's gonna get it, but she's gonna get it from her friends who don't know anything. She's gonna get it from the things she sees on television, from the movies, from the magazines and the books that romanticize what this looks like. And I just, and when he said that, and I really thought and considered, he was right. He was absolutely right. And I'm so glad that, I decided to expose her to that part of the relationship. And then we ultimately married and, and she's grown now and she's got a very healthy, um, attitude and disposition about relationships. I've seen her as she's dating and, what she will and will not tolerate and the things that she looks for. And I do think it was because of some of that early exposure. So, if we are not intentional about that, we can very easily just continue these horrible cycles of unhealthy and toxic relationships. It's very, very real.
How important do you think the example should come from within the household between the two couples versus it coming from outside of it, such as friends, media, and maybe even acquaintances?
I think critical when the relationship in the household is a healthy and happy one. I mean, no relationship is perfect. Every relationship has its struggles, but a healthy and happy relationship when people have conflict, contention, struggles, the way they work through them is the difference, right? Um, if I am in disagreement with my husband, I'm not going to berate him and call him names, and we're going to attack the issue, not the person. And so, if you have good models of that in the home, then the home is the place where it's supposed to be the best. That's not always the case. Sometimes people have grandparents that have kind of that idyllic picture, and they may not see that at home as much. But when it's a happy and healthy relationship in the home first and foremost, I think is where that definition of healthy and happy relationships should come from. Because, you know, people are writing those stories in the movies. People are writing those stories in the book. And most people are probably making up that stuff they're telling you about, their relationship. It may or may not be true.
I always wonder what was the attraction of airing out your not so good and your bad parts of a relationship. Like I look back on my relationships, I didn't do that. First and foremost, I always went to the person I was in the relationship with, and I made sure that there was a separation between me and my woman at that time and my friends. But as I've gotten older and I've worked with a lot of women, in regards to their different types of relationships, whether it's friends, family, or romantic. I see a lot of them struggle to keep their friends out of their business. It's not necessarily because the friends are inquisitive and they want to know. They, in a lot of ways, allow themselves to be manipulated
Mhm,
in a negative light. And I'll give you an example because I saw this recently. I was watching an interview and this newly married couple, they went out. It was the woman's birthday
mhm,
and she invited her friends, and there's about 20 people. So there was the man, one of his friends, and then there was the woman, and then there were 17 of her friends, right? And when the bill came, he was going to pay for him, his wife, right? And then everyone else paid for their own. So the friends of the wife had a issue with this. They were expecting him to pay, and let me tell you, Rhonda, they were ordering food that they probably knew they couldn't afford, right? So when the bill came now and they had this argument, the interesting thing about it is a lot of people would think that the husband and wife would side together, but the female friends, they were pumping up this woman in such a negative way that she ended up calling her husband broke in the restaurant, no good, embarrassing. How can you treat me like this? Treat my friends like this? And he's standing there asking her, do you hear how you're talking to me? Because she was actually losing herself because the peanut gallery in
mhm,
the back was pumping her up to be this way. And I share that because I think a lot of times we love our friends. We like our friends,
mhm,
but
mhm,
we know deep down a lot of our friends have no business talking about any type of relationship,
mhm.
right? But why do you think we allow our friends to influence us in such negative ways when we know the advice isn't any good because their track history shows that they should even be considering giving advice when it comes to relationships?
So I think that culturally, um, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even the 90s, the culture in our society was, you don't air your dirty laundry, right? You keep things close to the vest. And I think in the 90s and the 2000s and beyond, there was the birth of this concept of transparency. And I think that it has taken on a mind really of its own. Um, and so people were feeling very comfortable kind of sharing and maybe oversharing um, the trauma and abuse that they've endured. and there was a rallying cry to kind of support that. And so now, it is very commonplace. And so, I need you to be transparent. Well, just be, and so there's this climate where there's almost a sense of entitlement, like, the expectation is there. And I think that's what breeds some of those things that we see in relationships. But I always will share with couples that you need to you have to work your stuff out and seek out things that help you to do that. So if you are struggling with communication, find resources that will help you. If you're struggling with finances, raising your children, if you're struggling with intimacy, whatever it may be, you as a couple have to do the work together to do that. Um, but a lot of times, unfortunately, what happens is, and it's particularly more prevalent with women than men, but it does happen sometimes, I think, with men, is you have some issue or conflict in the relationship, then you go share that with your girlfriends. Well, they don't have any expertise around one, your relationship, and two, you may not know if they are in fact supportive of your relationship, right? If they're going to just always side with you, or are they going to take the position of help doing things that are going to help to sustain and strengthen the relationship, which might include saying some things that you don't want to hear. Girl, you were wrong about that. You should have never said that to him. You were totally out of order. You have to make it right by first apologizing for what you did and asking for his forgiveness. And then maybe you guys can talk about how often does that happen? Not as often as it needs to, but oftentimes it is counterproductive because I don't know, maybe there's some level of envy or jealousy. Um, but it is, as a body of believers, we are to edify each other. And so um you got to keep that stuff close to the vest. And if you do need outside support or counsel, it has to be with people who would put your relationship first, because it makes a difference than what they say, right? So one might encourage, girl, you need to leave that joker, is what one might say, as opposed to, well, you might want to think about that because I kind of feel like you weren't right. And there was some justification, but we don't hear those conversations as much as we need to. And that's really what needs to happen. So no, keep it close to the vest. But if you're at an impasse and you do need some outside support, it needs to be somebody who values the relationship and supports the relationship. And who's going to be honest and truthful with you about that. So those would be the only exceptions. And so the person who values the relationship and or has a happy, healthy marriage, um, but it's hard sometimes to discern that. You don't know unless you're up in there.
I'm glad you mentioned the last part because I was about to say they don't ever seem to go to a married person and get their advice, right? It's
Mhm.
always Shaniqua down the street,
Exactly.
right?
Not
Or they don't
married,
ever
and
want
they've
to
been
pay
married
for it.
60 years.
Yeah, or they don't ever want to pay for it. Like it's interesting, like because a marriage is an investment, right?
Yes, it
So
is.
you mentioned go to someone with expertise. When they're having problems, how many people, when they're having an issue in their marriage, they deem it serious enough that they're considering going outside of the marriage to talk about it. They don't ever want to pay for that advice.
I think that's very sad and unfortunate because it is, I mean, this is a major component of your life that impacts how you're navigating the world. There's nothing bigger that has that kind of impact. And so, if you're in a crisis and you're committed, you've made this lifelong commitment, then certainly you would want to invest. I mean, you're not going to buy a luxury car and put cheap gas in it, you know? So the same principle applies. You've got to prioritize and make the sacrifice because it can make all the difference in the world.
I recently watched a show a couple of weeks back, and this couple, they were married for a number of years. They have two kids.
Mhm.
Very religious. They go to church every week, and they're having some issues. And what they did, which I think is missing, is they went to a church elder. They
Mhm.
sat down and they said, "Church elder," the man said his issues, the woman said her issues, and he listened. And then his words, which I think you're alluding to when you said that, put the relationship first, he asked the question, "What you're doing to the man," he's like, to the man, "What is it that you're doing?" And he said to the woman, "What is it that you're doing? Is it in alignment with the teaches and the expectations of the marriage?" They both sat back, like, He's like, "That's where the advice is going to come from. You can feel
Mhm.
what you feel, you can think what you think, but once you agree to come together, you're at a responsibility to each other under the guidance of the religious expectations."
Mhm.
Now, for those who may not be religious, when you're in a relationship, you've come together with the responsibility of you two are going to make it work under whatever guidance you deem appropriate. That guidance, it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't ever include the involvement of your friends,
Right.
right? Because I don't know what vows they took,
Exactly.
right? So I know that you have the history and religion is very important to you.
Mhm.
How important do you think having that mindset where whatever problem you're going through, whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling, is it in alignment with what is guiding that relationship? How important do you think that is?
It's essential, it's critical, it's non-negotiable. Um, and I think that's how you work through conflict. Um, so I believe and subscribe to, I mean, there are lots of biblical principles I think that um, drive marriage, but I think there's 10 fundamental ones. And in most instances, when you look at the conflict and contention, you can identify which principle has been violated. And once you identify the principle that has been violated, then you can work your way back into alignment. And so I think that same approach can be used. You have to have shared understanding, shared value, shared principle about how we govern this relationship. Um, that exists in any entity. I mean, when you look at in the school system, there's a shared understanding. When you look in corporate America, there's a shared understanding. When you look in nonprofit organizations, there's a shared understanding. That's a structure that exists in our world. It's no different in marriage. So there has to be some shared understandings, shared principles. And when those are violated, there has to be a process to move back. You've got to first identify what it is that has been violated and then work your way to a harmonious reconnection to the principle. Yeah, absolutely.
Is that communication piece missing or maybe not used as often as it should be?
I absolutely think that it's missing, and I think that sometimes it is um, not clearly labeled and identified, right? So, um, you can be in a relationship and know there's something wrong and not know why it's wrong. Like you're just dealing with kind of the symptoms of the issue, but you're not getting to the root cause of the matter. And I think a lot of times people operate on that superficial kind of level and don't always get to the root cause. Um, and so, that that's where a lot of folks are kind of comfortable with, when you when you start peeling back the layers of the onion, trying to get to the root cause of the matter, that's when it can be very uncomfortable. It can be painful. It can be um it can shake the core of your foundation. And so who wants to volunteer for that process? Not very many people, but it's necessary. And it's definitely necessary.
Wonder why.
Mhm.
I always wonder why some people find it so difficult to talk to their partner, but it's so easy for them to talk to everybody else, including strangers. Sometimes I wonder, is it that it's difficult for a lot of people, doesn't matter how long they're together, to be vulnerable in front of that person?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's that level of vulnerability. I mean, and when we open ourselves to up to that level of vulnerability, what does that mean? It means I might get hurt. And I don't want to feel that. Well, when you get hurt, you're not hurt forever. You can move out of that. Um, you can grow from that. You can be better as a result of that. So I think, you know, it's it kind of goes back to the idea that when you commit to marriage, you are committing to being one. So there should be the highest level of comfort sharing with your spouse versus your girlfriend or your guy friend. Because you're one, you're not one with that girlfriend. You're not one with that guy friend. You've made that commitment to be one with your spouse. And um, and so, you know, you can be vulnerable with that person because even though you may feel discomfort, you may feel hurt, you may feel whatever, that person is gonna comfort you. That person is because people don't like to feel hurt. So if I hurt myself, I'm gonna do something to make it better. I cut myself, I'm gonna put something on it, I'm gonna bandage it up. So if you are a part of me, and you've opened up and you feel hurt, I'm going to do something. I'm going to try to help move the hurt away or um, to look at next steps. You know, I'm going to do something to try to make you feel better. This is temporary. Um, let's talk about how we can move through this. Girlfriends aren't going to do that. They're just more than likely, I mean, not all, but more than likely it's a pity party. It's a pity party and it doesn't move the relationship.
I agree. I agree. I gave someone the example and I told him that there's levels to it. And he asked me what did I mean? And I said that when you look at the hierarchy of things, your friends are in, for the most part, a permanent third position. And he asked me, what do I mean? I was like, well, it's going to be you. And then it's going to be whatever partner that you're in is going to be slotted in that second slot,
Mhm.
right? Meaning that you and your partner are always going to be above your friends. Some
Mhm.
people, I think, as a coping mechanism, as defense mechanism, their friends are number one, baby, right at the top, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, no matter how much pain I'm feeling, if my friends are okay, then we're good. No matter how much pain my partner's feeling, my children, as long as they're underneath their friends, is because their friends, depending on the type of structure it is, they're always going to be there in some capacity because you're more forgiving,
Mhm.
right? A lot of us, have friends that have done things to us that we wouldn't expect our partner, that we wouldn't accept from our partner. A lot of us have accepted things from our job that we wouldn't
Mhm,
accept from our partner. So
mhm,
it's interesting to see how some people, as we discussed, right, the vulnerabilities that I'm going to close myself off to my partner in so many ways that I'm fully open to everyone else. But how is that fair to your partner? And then when your partner realizes that, how are you going to have that type of conversation where now your partner feels like like he or she is second, third, or fourth to people that in the grand scheme of things don't really matter? Because rest assured, when some of those friends marry off, they're gone.
mhm. Yeah, things are those that scenario, things are out of order. And when things are out of order, there will inevitably come trouble. Um, there is a place for healthy boundaries. Um, you know, when you have a relationship, you have to have healthy boundaries in order for the relationship to not only grow, but to strengthen, to be able to withstand some of the outside pressures that really are not designed to support that relationship. And oftentimes those outside pressures are the folks that are closest to you, friends and family. Um, but it's a mindset, it's an attitude, it's a disposition. It is accepting this idea again that we are one. And our relationship to God is first, and our relationship to each other is second, even with children. I've seen in relationships where children have superseded the spouse. That's out of order. Mm-mm. You are man and wife first, and you are parents second. Um, and one of the things that one of the examples I always share with young women is um, when you're traveling, right, on a flight, and they go through those emergency procedures, and they say, "Oh, you better take the mask for yourself first, because your natural inclination is to do that for your children." And I ask why. Well, because if you're dead, you can't help your kids. So you got to take care of you. I said the same is true for marriage. You've got to take care of your marital relationship before you allow your kids to interfere with that. And that's not to say that you don't rear them and take care of their fundamental needs, but you want to be mindful that you are not placing your kids above your marriage relationship, which
Why
I
do you
know
think
is
so
probably.
many people, yeah, why do you think so many people fall into the trap of not realizing that there is an order to the relationship, to the marriage? And if you try to step out of that, it's unnatural and your results are going to be unnatural as well. Why do you think there's a disconnect?
Um, I think for a lot of reasons that um, in our society, in our culture, we haven't espoused these biblical principles that govern marriage. Marriage is just a part of our culture. That's just something that we do. And it works sometimes and it doesn't work sometimes. And we kind of has accepted that. We don't have conversations about how to choose a mate. Um, back in the day, there was a term called courting. It was different than dating. And it was a time when you were, looking for the people who have those characteristics that would help to sustain a long-term relationship. We don't engage in that kind of conversation anymore. Um, People don't have shared definition of what marriage is. Um, people I think sometimes think that real a marriage relationship is just two people who get along, who like each other, who enjoy each other's company, and then they just decide they're going to be married until they're not. And it kind of stops there. And we need to dig a little deeper. We need to talk about what is marriage, who created it, why do we have marriage? Um, what purpose does it serve? And if God is the creator of it, well, golly, I need to be looking to see what he says about it. It's just that simple. And I think we've taken marriage away from God, and have come up with our own kind of, ideas about what marriage is, and what it isn't. It's sad when people enter into marriage with an exit plan. Well, if this doesn't work out, we'll just divorce and move on. There's no, fighting for the relationship kind of um kind of thing going on. And I think if we engaged more on the front end, we wouldn't have such ridiculous divorce rates. I mean, it's so sad when it can be such a wonderful thing, for the couple, for families, for our society, for our communities. I think when we have issues in the family, it manifests in issues in society.
I think broken homes is having such an impact on society and as well as people. Like I see an increase in the negative view of marriage,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
rightfully so, because divorce is a serious thing and divorce has so many consequences to it, positive and negative. If you're in an abusive situation, you're now free of that, and that's a positive. But if you're in a situation and you're married and you ultimately say that I don't like this person anymore, some people are going to look at you as like, well, you're not always going to like the person you marry, but you're always going to love the person. And you made a good point earlier on where you mentioned that there's the lack of the conversation. Like
Mhm.
why did you get married? And if that's
Mhm.
something you can't answer, don't get married.
Mhm.
I think
Exactly.
it's as simple as that, right? Like when we go to the gym, we go to the gym with a game plan. Like I don't know anyone that's had a successful body transformation that's gone to the gym and say, "Hey, you know what? I'm just going to pick up every single weight in this gym and then go home." Right? You have to go there. Starts in the gym. Well, sorry, starts in the home. What's my plan? Okay, I want to lose a little bit of weight. I want to gain this. Okay, what am I going to do at the gym? Same thing. I want to get married. Perfect. What does that look like for you? Right?
Mhm.
If you're religious, if you're in the church, you know already because you've been taught. And rest
Well,
assured, right?
maybe you have, maybe you haven't. That's what I'm saying. It's not as explicitly taught and discussed as it should be. Because even though the divorce rate is high, it's almost as high in the church now as it is with non-believers.
So you're saying that in the church are not having as strict a conversation as they should be having, or maybe that they had previously?
Yes, it's not happening as much. Um, it's just not happening as much. A lot of times in churches where they have marriage ministry, it just becomes a social kind of experience. They socialize together as opposed to the level of teaching and learning. That's kind of what I see. There's more socialization than there is really ministering and teaching and learning. Um, we you say, why get married if you're not willing to do the investment? We are designed to be in community with each other. We are designed to be with one another, and that's a part of our drive for relationships. Um, and so then I think people, that drive, that desire, sometimes overpowers or supersedes the work that needs to take place in order to have that, like the illustration used with the gym. Well, I want to be fit, but I'm not willing to do the work. So give me a magic pill, give me a magic potion, give me magic oil,
Let me get my
and let's see how
BBL.
that works. And it's kind of the same with relationships, you know. Let me tap right, tap left, or however that works. I'm not on the social media, so I don't know. But yeah, so don't always want to do the work, but the desire is definitely there. Um, you look at the amount of literature that's out there. You look at the social media, the television shows, the desire. People want it, but some are not willing to do the work. And then um, we are not having enough conversation around what it takes, not
Do
honest conversation about what it takes.
you think that people want it so bad from a verbal aspect, meaning that they'll speak it into the existence, like they'll say that I really, really want to get married, but then when you call their bluff, for lack of a better term, to say, okay, what are you willing to do about it? That's where they freeze and they're like, okay, maybe I don't want it that bad because now I'm being confronted with the amount of work and preparation I actually have to do.
I think it's probably just scary. I think the apprehension is probably fear of failure, um, fear of being unhappy, fear of being unfulfilled. I think fear is a huge driving force for why people, don't want to do the work. And the work is it can be tough, but it's no tougher than any kind of work you would do for anything that you might participate in, so um I don't know, it's just like how God has given man certain roles and a woman certain roles in the relationship, and for some reason, we don't want to embrace those roles, but we'll embrace roles in other contexts, like, somebody who serves as the principal of a school versus the teacher, someone who's the president versus the vice president. Like, we can accept people in different roles, and we can recognize that they are both equal. They're both humans. They just have different responsibilities. But when it comes to marriage, we just what, we don't have that same level of acceptance. And again, I think it just goes back to not having these kinds of conversations. um when we embrace these roles, the power and the synergy in the relationship is just amazing. um when you think about in the corporate setting, when when everybody is doing their part, things move along. I mean, this the principle exists in other facets of life and works. We have to learn how to apply that same principle in our marriage relationships. And I think the more we talk about it, the more conversations like this certainly helps.
So, Rhonda, as we look to close, what's some tips that you can give my audience to help marriage and the pursuit of it less scary for them?
Less scary. Well, I will take this opportunity to kind of plug my book, Until Death Do Us Part, My Journey to Joy in Marriage. And I talk about these basic biblical principles that literally have the power to sustain a happy and healthy marriage if you embrace them, if you have the conviction to follow them. And so in the book, regardless of where you are in your marital relationship, whether you're just starting out or you've contacted an attorney and you're ready to divorce, there are some tasks that I ask the reader to consider. And they help you to identify what principles might be violated in the relationship, and then the steps necessary to move along. Um, so I would like to talk about that. The other is um, understanding boundaries. When you are navigating relationships with your friends, with your family, and you're in a mindset where you want to have a happy and healthy marriage, but you're just kind of in that trajectory, going in that direction. I would encourage you. I wish I had the copy, but the name of the book is Boundaries. It's a great book to help eliminate some of those experiences where the lines have been crossed and it's hard then to um, um, have a healthy and happy relationship. It helps you to navigate relationships with your friends, with your families, when you have a clear um, idea of what boundaries are. And it's also based on biblical principles. So those are a couple of good resources. And the other piece is just um, do your due diligence, learn more, and make sure that the materials that you're gathering are in alignment with the person who created marriage, which is God. It has to be in alignment with biblical principle. So there is hope. um, Even if you believe your marriage is dead, there is hope because God resurrects the dead and he can resurrect a dead marriage.